Hey, it's time for another The Sales Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hunter. Yeah, The Sales Hunter. What are we talking about today? We're talking about the metrics of selling. Brent Adamson is in the studio. Hey, he's the co-author of The Challenger Sale and The Customer Challenger. I couldn't find the other book, but hey, I'm holding for you watching the video, The Challenger Sale. But anyway, what we're going to talk about, the metrics of selling. Let's roll the video and we're going to get Brent in the studio.
You're, you're listening to the Sales Hunter podcast with Mark Hunter, where the focus is to help you as a sales leader sell with confidence and integrity. And now here's your host.
Hey, when it comes to closing deals, Calendly knows how important maintaining momentum is for your sales team. Calendly provides the automation you need to connect with your best leads faster and schedule every meeting throughout your sales cycle. Prevent digital delays that stall deals and let your team focus on what they do best, driving revenue. Request your demo of Calendly today. I can't even talk this morning. Wow. Hey, in the studio, coming on right now, we have Brent Adamson. He is, you know him as the co-author of The Challenger Sale and Wow, so many great insights. Brent, I've got a nickname for you, the Sage of Sales. How's that?
Oh, that it would be actually it's fitting, Mark, for me because it overpromises and allows me to underdeliver, which is kind of my shtick. So I think it's perfect.
No, you have been you have sat in the driver's seat of sales for years in terms of really understanding all of your relationships and your contacts. Nobody knows more CROs, VPs of sales in the industry than you do, period. I mean, we can drop the mic and go home on that one. But what we're talking about right now is the metrics of selling. Because you've got some real interesting insights, because you even question whether or not salespeople know what to measure.
Well, yeah, I mean, and go and go. So this is something we've been battling for years in our research. And by the way, if I may just real briefly say, you're right. Remember Rolodex? So I have a pretty good Rolodex, but it's only because I've had the privilege of working with sales organizations all over the world for a couple decades. And they're the ones doing the heavy lifting, right? The leaders, the managers, the frontline sellers, the marketers, the enablers, everyone does the hard work of figuring this out. I'm a researcher. That's what I do. I research sales and I write and talk about it. And that's actually a lot easier to do than actually do the hard work of selling. But so here's me on my high horse saying, here's what y'all are doing wrong. But on the activity front, or the metrics front, I think what's interesting there is that there's a couple things. One, we could talk a little bit about what we've seen for a while, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about what I'm working on now. But the for many organizations, I think this is especially endemic even still today in the SaaS world, Mark, as you know, is it's an activity-driven metric system. So how many in-mails have you sent out? How many calls have you put on the books? How many follow-ups? How many demos? So we're measuring activity, sales activities, which is an inside-out kind of perspective. This has been a problem for years, only in this sense. And here's why it's a problem. It's like, because I want to be careful. I say, you bunch of idiots, what are you doing? But rather, that's fine as long as those activities that you're measuring are actually predictive of customer outcomes, right? Then if one serves as an effective proxy of the other, knock yourself out. But I would argue, and I think we've seen demonstrably in both in research and in just practical experience, we live in a world where activity is no longer predictive. So sales activity or sales actions are no longer predictive of customers' reactions, right? So, or the math has just gone really cattywampus, right? So it used to take, I don't know, 10 emails to get one call. Now it takes 100 emails to get a call because no one answers the emails or whatever that math might be. And I'll never forget, this is actually a while ago. This is still in the CEB days. I was talking to a head of sales about this very challenge, and she looked she's chief revenue officer, and she was looking at me, very pained look on her face. And it was about this time of the year, so it was end of quarter close, end of year close, right? We're heading into the final couple of months or a couple of weeks of the year, and she looked at me and said, "It's so funny we're talking about this, Brent, because let me tell you what I'm facing right now." She says, "Let me show you my activity dashboard." She showed me her dashboard, and it's like, number of calls, number of demos, all the kinds of activities. And she said, "Brent, every one of these metrics on this dashboard are lit up green. We are killing it. We are killing the number of emails sent. We're killing the number of demos. Every one of them, we are lighting it up like a Christmas tree. It's like everything's green." And then she looked at me and said, "You know what? we're going to miss our number by about $7 million. And the pain in her eyes when she shared that was pretty visceral, right? Because, and that's the world I think that we live in, Mark, is that if we're not solving for what the customer actually does as opposed to what we do, then at the end of the day, all those metrics, frankly, are probably the wrong ones. If that makes sense, I would imagine you probably agree. I don't know. I don't know if anyone would
I
disagree.
do. But
Yeah.
here's the question: how do we get in front of it? Because what you've been talking about is so key. The activity,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
activity doesn't deliver the same results. So how do we get in front of this curve? Because you just said something about if we're not really listening to what the customer's saying.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
So it's a pretty straightforward concept. It's been around for a while. You know, we identified it at CEB in 2000, I don't know, 6 or something like this. It's been a while. And by the way, if I just real briefly, I would call it a guy named Mike Blanchett, who is the global head of sales enablement over at Veeam. At the time when we met him, he was at Business Objects right before they got acquired by SAP. Mike is brilliant. And he, among many other sales leaders or sales enablement leaders, had developed a portfolio of what we ultimately at CB called customer verifiers. So a customer verifier is a specific action that you can observe your customer taking. It's got to be it's got to be observable, it's got to be objective, and it's got to be binary, either yes or no. And based on those specific actions, and watching them, they become predictive of where the customer is in the buying journey. So very simple. One that Mike came up with that we still talk about today is something he used to call a sponsor letter. I think he may be still using this idea, but a sponsor letter is, so you have your initial call with a client. So this is relatively early in the pipeline. You have a conversation, you map out challenges, you essentially have I guess you call it a discovery call. And then as a result of that call, you write a follow-up, probably email, not a letter, but a follow-up email, and say, here's what I heard, here's what I understood, here's what we talked about, here's the things that you feel like you have to get right in this order. Essentially, kind of just it's a report out on the call. And then you send it to the customer. Now, you'd think, okay, great. So everyone does that, or at least everyone should do that. That's the verifier. But that's actually not the verifier. The verifier is not the fact that you wrote this summary and sent it. What you're doing when you send it, Mark, is you say, would you agree? And are you ready for the next step? Right? So did I get this right? As a result, I would suggest the next step is this. Would you agree? The verifier is when the customer replies, yes. So yes, I agree that that's what we talked about. Yes, I agree that that's my next priority. And yes, I agree that's the next step. And that tells you then that customer's ready to go from whatever is stage 1 to stage 2 or 2 to 3. But it's that moment where the customer does them, not where you do. It's like, because I think a lot of us say, did you send the letter? Okay, move it to stage 2. But Mike made the clear, he's like, no, it's not whether you sent the letter, move it to stage 2. It's whether your customer agreed, now send it to stage 2. That's the verification that your customer's ready to move forward. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. We have to pace ourselves to what our customers are actually doing. Sometimes they'll move faster than us. More often than not, they'll probably move slower than we'd prefer. But, and I can nudge them, I can prod them, I can challenge them, I can support them and enable them. But one way or another, it doesn't matter what we're doing until the customer actually comes along. So, and what I like about that particular verifier, simple as it is, like, first of all, again, it's binary, right? Yes or no, right? And it's objective. They said yes. So I know those things are kind of kissing cousins. So, because what'll happen, the other thing, Mark, is we'll say, did you send a letter? Yes. Well, did they respond? Yeah. And are we moving forward? They seem to really excited. They really like the meeting. They really, so in other words, the sales rep will, sometimes with happy ears, I suppose, will just say, will give their sort of impression of what they think is going on. Because here's what I think is happening. Here's my interpretation. And not because they're bad or not competent or, just trying to get away with one or trying to go to Cancun or whatever it is. It's because they truly legitimately think that's where things are. But that's no guarantee that they're right. The better person to determine where things are isn't the sales rep's interpretation of the customer, but the customer's actual demonstrated actions.
I want to run with this for a second because I'm wondering if salespeople are afraid to ask that binary question, that yes or no, because they're afraid of hearing no, and they just want to assume the customer's ready to move forward.
I would
you
too.
think that's
Wouldn't you? I
Well,
totally would. That's what I would do because it's scary, right?
Well, that brings up a good issue because I see so many people just trying to manage their pipeline to appease their manager.
Yeah. Well, so I'm now at the age, I'm 54, where I actually have a sampling of life lessons, right? I've learned a few things in my life. Not many, but a couple. But one of the things I've learned the hard way again and again and again, just by getting knocked in the teeth with this, is that when something scares you, you can't run away from it. And by the way, for what's full disclosure and stuff people don't want to know about, I struggle with this every single day. I've got a project right now that I'm struggling with on this, but it's like, you can't run away from it. You have to run right at it. The things that make you most nervous, whether it's a professional, whether it's a sales call, a customer reaction, and a verifier, run right at it. If you don't ask the question, you won't know. And that takes a certain amount of confidence, it takes a certain amount of swagger, and it takes a certain amount of risk and putting yourself out on a limb, because you're right. They could say, actually, you didn't get this right and I'm not ready to move forward. Now you got to go tell your manager, but you're just in a better position because now you know, and now you can fix it. And if you think you're going to get fired, then maybe you're at a bad company with a really crappy culture. I don't know. That's a different story, but you got, yeah, I think you have to, because you have to run right after it, because otherwise you wind up with a dashboard that's lit up green and missing your number by $7 million. And that's worse.
You are really touching on a sore spot for a lot of salespeople, and I see this all the time, where they just make assumptions. They simply make assumptions. And
go ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, and because they're afraid to address the difficult question. And I'd love to get your input on this. Why are salespeople afraid to ask the difficult question, especially early on in the sales process?
Well, because it's scary, man. I mean, come on, you sold really big deals, right? You were in
selling today, okay?
I know, right? Because it's scary. And let's think about it, right? So, because if they say no, then one, that somehow implies maybe I did something wrong. So now I second guess my capability. My manager potentially second guesses my capability. Maybe my career's on the line. Maybe I'm going to miss my number. Oh, by the way, my number is like, my ability to feed my family and pay for college is contingent on me hitting the number. That number is posted publicly across the company, determines whether or not I get to go to Cancun. I mean, the stakes are really not only high, they're incredibly personal, and they are insanely meaningful. And all of that in the tiny little crucible of whether or not you're comfortable sending a letter. So what seems like ridiculous is actually quite sublime, right? So, and I think that's the things we fail sometimes to extrapolate from the consequences in them. So it's an empathy moment, Mark. It's so easy for you and I to sit here and say, why don't they just do this? It's because it's scary. It's because it's hard. It's because the consequences, if it doesn't work out, are terrifying. And I don't want to overstate. I know I may be overselling it, but those are very human emotions. And so one of the things, if I'm a manager in this situation, I would think, like, how can I de-risk this? How can I create an environment where my sales reps don't feel that way? Because once you can see where this is me, like, welcome to my projection bias, right? I assume everyone in the world thinks like this. In fact, I'm probably right for about 2% of the people on the planet. But I think in extremes like this. In fact, one of my colleagues at CB once told me, Brent, not everything is a rounding error between 0 and infinity, but that's kind of how I see the world, right? So it's all black and white.
That is a tweetable moment right there.
Isn't that that's the most amazing quote and comment about me I've ever heard in my life. His name's Eric. He's a dear friend, and boy, did he nail me to the wall with that one. But it's like, but if I'm a manager and I'm working with a sales team, I think I've got to understand that some of them see it that way. Not all of them, but some of them do. And so that puts them in the state of paralysis. And so the question for me is, like, how would I de-risk that? How do I make it feel less consequential? It's important that that letter gets sent, or whatever verifier we're talking about, that certain activities happen. But how do I make sure that reps feel supported in doing that, not scared to do it? How do I create an environment which they are willing to run at it as opposed to run away from it? I think is a really interesting question. Notice we just left sales world and got into psychology world really quickly, right? This is about human emotion and how people interact.
But wait a minute, though. But that's the real world we live in, because sales is really psychology. I mean, let's not think for a moment that sales is not emotional. You touched on something else that I think, and I wonder if this is. I remember I did this a lot when I was in sales, when I was carrying a quota early on.
Yeah.
If it got to the end of the stage, if it got right to negotiation stage and I lost it, I didn't get in as much trouble as if I didn't have enough stuff in my pipeline. So I would keep stuff in my pipeline. And I'm wondering if that is adding to this whole problem we have of salespeople not asking tough questions.
Yeah, I mean, probably, right. So it's CB. Sorry to harken back to a bunch of older research, but this stuff is still so true today. But we used to talk about. I think it's in one of the Challenger books. I'm pretty sure we put it in the Challenger Customer, the second one. I can't remember, to be honest, but we talked about what we used to call the nail versus the wedge. And essentially the nail and the wedge were descriptions of a shape of a pipeline. So the wedge is you start out big and you narrow, 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 narrow. It's like just gradually, and you kind of run after everything with equal force and equal effort and just kind of discard things as you go, and it really truly wipes out. That's the wedge. The nail, think about it, is like it's really wide at the beginning, but then it narrows rapidly to a sharper point and then carries on as a sharper point. And what we found is that the metaphor was based on actual data, that we could see sales reps, the star performing sales reps, qualified out, and they qualified out very early. And then they only pursued those things that were truly worth their time. And so logically, I see you nodding, right? So it's logically, it's so easy to say, again, researcher hat on, of course you do this, right? But from a sales rep perspective, it just seems so risky. It's like, I'm in this situation right now at our company. It's like, I can just stand up and say, I'm not going to pursue that opportunity. I don't think it's worth our time. It's like, because I think in sales, this isn't happening at our company, but I think in sales more broadly, Mark, if you were to raise your hand in some organizations as a sales professional and effectively in some way say, I'm not going to pursue that, I don't think it's worth my time, I think the immediate result is a stigma that gets applied to you that, oh, Mark's just not hungry enough. He's just not a go-getter. He is not, he doesn't really want it. I need sales reps who really want it and are going to go for it, and so, and so everything, the whole testosterone driven like rhetoric of our function in sales drives people to really bad behaviors, because then they, well, then I guess I got to really want it. I have to go after everything. And like, that's the least principled thing you could possibly do. But I think that's part of what's going on.
Oh, man, I love what you're saying. We're going to take just a pause here to say we want to thank the great people at Calendly for their sponsorship. If you're ready to get control of your calendar and book more high-value meetings, then it's time to get started with Calendly. We'll put the link in the show notes below. Hey, I love your visual of the nail. I've always said you want to qualify out as rapidly as possible. That's one of the things I loved about the customer challenger. Because you talk about that now. Because again, I want to spend more time with fewer prospects. Because if I can spend more time with fewer prospects, I can create more value.
That's
now,
right.
Go back to the whole thing. You were raising this whole thing about the binary question, that yes and that no. You talked about that early on.
Yeah.
What are some other things that you think salespeople need to be doing quickly to get ahead of this curve of just going through activities?
So what's really neat about this idea of customer verification and these customer verifiers is you can string them together. So if you map out a customer buying journey, not a sales process, but a buying journey, the journey your customer has to go on, who they need to get involved, the questions they need to get resolved, the alignment they need to create, the buy-in that they need to achieve, you can actually build out a roadmap for how that purchase process needs to happen. And by the way, you can't just ask your customer, how does it need to happen? Because either they won't know, or they'll probably have some really bad ideas. Like, I know we should put off talking to procurement until the last minute. That's a really bad idea, right? It's like, how about this? How about you bring procurement in early and actually get their input, right? So you can actually play a role as a guide or a coach, or I used to say a Sherpa, and take your customer by the hand and guide them through their purchase process. We at Gartner, we called that buyer enablement. I think it's a brilliantly important idea. But when it comes to this verifier idea, that it takes it one step further, which is, and I could actually draw that, I could map it. So we talk all the time about mapping the customer buying journey. What if we actually provided a map, or maybe even better, co-created a map with the customer of their buying journey? Here's what we think. Tell me about your situation. Who are the players on your side? Here, you haven't mentioned this person. We've been working with other companies like you. We find this person probably needs to get involved. Here's the question. So, but together you can create that map, and then you can put a timeline against it and say, here's what needs to happen first. So like order it serially. So these things happen serially. These things happen parallel, first, second, third, whatever it might be. Here are the owners. Here's the timelines. And here's how we will all know whether you're ready to move from this stage to the next stage. Is this demonstrated behavior, like the demo actually happens, or you agree to this point, or whatever it is. And once you map all that together, that document, that roadmap itself, which is called a sequence of events, becomes a verifier. In other words, when your customer says, yes, that's the journey that we agree we should go on, that's an early verifier. Is just them literally quite signing off on in an email, whether it's actually maybe even signing. In the old days, we used to sign on these. Is say, yes, this is the road. This is our journey. That's our roadmap. So is there a roadmap or a sequence of events logged in the system? And more importantly, has the customer agreed that that's the right sequence? And then each one of those steps in that sequence of events becomes its own verifier as well. Well, I'll tell you, and it's a self-serving comment, I will tell you, Mark, because I'm super excited about it. This is part of the platform at Ecosystems that the company I'm at, Ecosystems, we have this really amazing platform that we provide companies. And one of the capabilities in the platform for this very reason is a road mapping tool to actually map out both the road to the purchase and then the road to value realization. And the reason why I'm so excited about it is because it's actually that's what you're doing here is you're co-creating that map with your customer, defining the steps along the way, and then providing a means both for you and your customer to monitor progress. We talked about how do we as the supplier know where we are on that journey. I think equally true is like, how can you help your customer know where they are on that journey? Because otherwise they lose confidence, they lose energy, they lose momentum, they wipe out. Other people get involved. These stakeholders go out, these stakeholders come in, and they don't remember. They don't have the institutional memory of knowing where they were on this journey or even why they were on it in the first place. All of those things happen. So putting this to paper, virtually or real, becomes really important. So all of that to say, sequence of events. If you're not doing it, you should.
I love what you do about co-creating the journey map, co-creating that.
Yeah.
I mean, that really puts things into a different level. And I can see that happening in the SaaS world, but in some other worlds, I see that a little. So if I go and co-create a journey map, the buyer journey map, what would be some of the first steps?
Well, it's funny you go SaaS. It's like, I think it works there. I just don't know if I'd even go there first. It's like whether I'm buying industrial turbines or a business consulting project or training or medical devices, whatever. Right? It's like there's. In fact, I was just working with a medical device company the other month. It was a few weeks ago now, but they're selling into hospitals, right? So and this is a tool that surgeons will use, right? But surgeons don't make the purchase decisions at hospitals. You know who does? CFOs and procurement officers. And by the way, you know what the CFO is worried about? Whether they should buy more equipment or they should build a parking garage to have more. Like literally, I talked to a head of sales at med device one year, and he said we are literally competing against parking garages. That's who we're competing against, right? So, and that's
and we wonder why healthcare. No, okay, we won't go down that path.
There is all sorts of snarky comments one can make there, right? But let's leave them. But yes, I agree with you. But so step one would be who all needs to be involved, right? So who are the different stakeholders that are going to be involved in this decision? And Hank Barnes, by the way, I was still at Gartner's, got some great thoughts on not everyone's created equal. Some are influencers, some are decision makers, some are veto. They can provide a veto. Some are just along for the ride and are just mildly interested. But mapping and by the way, providing your customer guidance on who that stakeholder universe should be, because oftentimes they'll overlook someone, and that person almost inevitably does get involved, but is almost always late and blows everything up, right? So who should be involved? And then is there a process for figuring out, all right, what do each of those different parties care about? What are their priorities? What are the outcomes, the objectives that they're trying to achieve in their business given their role? So I call that stage identify. So identify who are the players and what do they care about. Then the next stage is align. So how do I align them around a common set of objectives? They're thinking parking garage and they're thinking healthcare outcomes. I got to align that somehow. How do I get them to agree like, yes, this thing is the thing we need, whether it's that or something in the middle or something altogether different. I got to get alignment. And so how can I provide alignment among the stakeholders? Third is 4 steps. Third one is prioritize. All right, now that I've got each stakeholder mapped to what they care about. I've got alignment that here's a subset of things that they all agree are important. How do I prioritize them? What's first? What's second? What's third? And then finally, how do I execute? So how do I okay, if that's the thing we care about in terms of an outcome, what are the steps we take to execute against achieving that particular outcome? I've got a rant coming. That's not a rant, but so I do these weekly little snackable content bite size. You've seen them called Brent's Breakdown. And I just recorded one that'll come out in a couple of weeks on this. And I think this is a better way of thinking of discovery. So rather than discovery, which is there's these no needs and I take the cover off of them, I discover them or uncover them. They're there. So it's just my role to reveal them. I think you don't reveal your customer outcomes and needs and objectives. You co-create them, you scope them. So rather than discovery, I like this idea of value scoping. And that's the process I just laid out is how do I collaboratively with my customer, and I can guide them, I can nudge them, I can challenge them along the way, but how do we scope the value that's important to them? And I think that's where this process of verifiers can really begin. And as you map out the customer journey, I would start there.
I love this whole idea. So which got done first, the parking garage or with the medical equipment?
That's a darn good question. I would imagine status quo, neither, but I don't know actually the
Gee,
stat.
you just hit the nail on the head when it comes to CFO and procurement and capital expenditures in the healthcare industry.
But that's just it. Imagine a world where I've got
Mm.
surgeons over
Right.
here saying I need to save lives, and I got a CFO over here saying I need to save money, and then I got a marketing guy from a hospital saying we need to improve the patient experience. And the worst part of the patient experience is coming here in an urgent care situation, not having a place to park your bleeping car. And so everybody's at like cats and dogs, and ultimately they decide they agree they can't agree, and so they just decide to keep on keeping on and do nothing.
Hey, what a great conversation. Hey, you were at.
Am I cynical and crabby? I sound cynical and crabby, Mark. I don't know.
But this is the real world, because we could talk for an hour just on the no decision that comes out of so many deals, right? I mean, that is the number one competitor we tend to face. But hey, you're at Ecosystems right now. They're working on the journey map. So tell the audience a little bit about what you're up to. We do have to wrap up here in about a minute. Just take a few seconds.
And for any, if this, it connects in a triggering sort of way, like you want to talk about it, that was a weird way to say it, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on email, badamson at ecosystems.us. But it often goes under the name of value management or value realization. What I've come to appreciate, Mark, is the platform that we've put together and built, which is really spectacular, is so much broader than that. I think of that as almost like the operating system of your commercial organization, because it starts, this value scoping exercise I just laid out is all embedded in the software. So in other words, and you can load it with hypotheses, you can load it with commercial insights, you can load it with the stakeholders pre-advanced, so your sales reps have a bounded conversation. It's not about 50 people, but about these 5. And it's a prompted, so you can load it with the hypotheses to have this value scoping conversation, to map it out. It's got the road mapping capability. It's got the ROI calculators and the TCO and all that kind of stuff is patented because it's super cool. But the one way to use our software, not having a structure to prompt and guide and then capture this conversation at an institutional level, so that knowledge can move from sales to success to service and then back onto expansion, as almost like an operating. It's like the CRM system we all wish we had. Do you know what I mean? It's the operating system of the actual customer facing relationship. That's what we do. I'd love to talk to people about it. It's very cool.
Wow. Brent, you are awesome. I called you the sage of sales to begin with, but I'm changing it to the researcher of the real sales or something of that nature. I have no idea.
Cranky old man. That's right.
No, hey, it's great insights. I always enjoy catching up with you. And with that, we have to thank you for listening, and thank you, Calendly, for sponsoring today's show and continuing to help sales teams focus on driving revenue. Prevent scheduling delays that stall deals, and let your team focus on what they do best, driving revenue. Request your demo of Calendly today. Hey, I do trust the content shared. It has been valuable. Brent has really brought some drop mic moments. And hey, take a moment to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Each week, you get 2 shows. One, a short sales insight from me, and a second from an interview with an expert like today, Brent Adamson. Hey, this is the Sales Hunter Podcast, your answer to quick insights. I'm Mark Hunter. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Brent.